In Life Matters, what's ahead now is a deeply confronting but also very powerful and affecting story. It's one, though, that's not for small or sensitive ears. It's about a kind of child abuse that is barely recognised or acknowledged. Two adult survivors speak of their experiences in a way that I think you'll find very compelling.
How I feel right now is if she were alive, I would want her prosecuted.
I carried the hatred that I had to my mother, to my wife, in a masked sense. So I've lived a sham. I've created a sham. And I'm not proud of that.
You've just heard the voice of Ian and before him Hamish. Two men who as children were sexually abused by their mothers. Yes, I did say their mothers. Since the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse was established in 2013, Australia's had a long and often traumatic public conversation about child abuse. And even though the stories of lives wrecked by systematic abuse are painful, many advocates are grateful that the issue is at least on the table. As a community, it's also prompted greater attention to sexual abuse, not just in institutions, but also in private homes. But the one kind of child abuse that no one is talking about is mothers who sexually abuse their sons. It is, however, the subject of research by Lucetta Thomas for her doctorate at the University of Canberra.
I became aware of a person called Marcus, who was struggling to come to terms with what happened to him in his childhood. He was sexually abused by his mother from a very young age, and he wasn't able to get a lot of support that he needed as an adult to come to terms with what happened. Eventually, unfortunately, he committed suicide as a result, and I felt that I needed to get his story out into the public domain to help other guys who'd also been sexually abused by their mother.
The sexual abuse of sons by their mothers, their biological mothers, is a very confronting thing. And I know, Lucetta, that some experts actually tried to discourage you from taking on this as research. Take me through why we feel it is so taboo.
To date, child sexual abuse is very gendered into male perpetrators and female victims, and that very much stems from the concept that mothers are natural nurturers and the overwhelming supporters and protectors of their children, that they'll go to any lengths to ensure that their children are protected. So it's battling that particular stereotype that I think society finds very, very difficult.
There's also the overall difficulty of believing that women can abuse men and boys sexually, that women are perpetrators of sexual violence.
Yeah, it is a concept that is really quite unheard of to an extent, the level of violence that a female can actually inflict upon a male. But females can actually be very, very strong where they wish to be.
She would have periods where she would love us intensely and she would take us out, and I got taken to the ballet and we got taken to restaurants. And, she dressed us nicely, but then there were also periods where she just clearly couldn't cope and she was physically abusive.
54-year-old Hamish. Now, Hamish isn't his real name, but he's a successful businessman. He has 2 grown sons, but for decades he kept secret his dark, traumatic childhood. Hamish grew up in a nice, leafy, middle-class suburb. He went to a private school, but life at home, behind closed doors, was anything but idyllic. As he tells reporter Ginger Gorman, his single mother was physically and sexually violent towards him. He still bears the scars. And a warning, this is a very difficult subject that you may find upsetting. Hamish is here talking about being brought up by a mother who was physically and mentally unwell.
For example, every now and again, my mother would threaten to kill us all, and she would lock all the doors, close all the windows. We had all these gas heaters, and we'd be freaking out, and eventually she'd call my grandmother, who'd come over.
When did she start sexually abusing you?
When I was 12 or 13. It wasn't before that, and it was somewhere between when I was 12 and 13. And it continued pretty much till she died when I was 15. She was always quite touchy-feely, hugging us a lot, giving us kisses, and it seemed relatively untoward. We would, it'd be nothing for us to, and our kids do it now, and I've done it with my kids when they were young. You hop into bed with them and you play games, and they're in bed and you pretend you're a monster, whatever. But it started with me, I don't know, lying in bed with her one day when nothing had happened, and she touched me, and I didn't stop her, and it just grew from there. She just continued, and I suppose I didn't have any control over my bodily functions, I suppose, in one respect, and I'm sort of coming to adolescence, and I suppose she saw that I was, for want of better words, sexually aroused, and she just took full advantage of that. And,
So you actually had sexual intercourse with her?
Maybe not that time, but we did shortly afterwards. Yeah.
It actually seems incredibly manipulative to prey on a boy that young who's coming into puberty in that way.
I look back on it now, and it's just unconscionable. I sort of relate back to having my own children and thinking of them being, well, anyone taking advantage of them, any adult, let alone your mother, taking advantage of someone that's that young when it's legally, for a start, it's not consensual. And I've said this to, my counsellor before, but, it's now, today, actually, the thought of what might have happened, I know this is a horrible thing to say, but the thought of what might have happened had she not died when I was 15, I just don't know. I mean, at least at that point, the abuse stopped, and I was able to, I was a year away from finishing school, and I ended up going to university, and I ended up having, normal relations with women and marrying, obviously, and having children. But how I feel right now is if she were alive, I would want her prosecuted.
And what did you think about it at the time? Did you understand what was happening to you, or did you feel some level of control over it? How did you process it?
Well, and bear in mind, what you've got to understand is that I've spent 4 decades not talking about it to anyone, trying not to think about it and burying it as deep as I can in the vaults of my mind. And so now you're asking me to put myself in my 14-year-old, 13-year-old body, and I suppose there was an element of feeling like an adult, and it wasn't just the sex. I was her de facto partner. She was ill, so I was the one that, when days she couldn't get out of bed, and there were literally days she couldn't get out of bed, I was the one that would do the shopping. I was the one that would clean the house. I was the one that would cook dinner. So it wasn't just this, it was everything else. And trying to look after my brother at the same time. It's all tied up. So I suppose, one thing I think probably that I felt was, feeling like, oh, I'm grown up, I'm an adult, I'm doing stuff that grown up people do. But I look back now as my 54-year-old self, and I'm just dismayed and horrified that anyone would have to go through that.
Well, the common long-term effects of the mother-son sexual abuse is that they're finding it very difficult to actually talk about what happened. They're very, very worried that they will be seen as, potential perpetrators. If they were sexually abused, then they'll go on to become perpetrators, which is what I referred to as the vampire syndrome. They're very distrustful of others, very unable to form and sustain relationships. There's a lot of self-loathing, shame and inner terror, and there are a lot of mental health and physical health issues that actually manifest as a result of this. There's depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, hypermasculinity, and self-harm and ultimately suicidality.
what damage has the abuse that your mother inflicted on you caused in your life?
I can't totally quantify it because I kept it to myself for so long. I know it has. I know it has damaged me. I know that when I eventually told my wife, which wasn't that long ago, that our relationship was never quite the same after that. And I know that when I entered into a new relationship, I told that person right from the beginning what I'd been through, and that probably did help. So I don't really know. I'm getting help for it now and working through all these issues. And I suppose the thing that I look back on, that the one thing that is good, it didn't prevent me from being what I think was and still is a really good father to my own children.
You said that your mother died when you were 15 years old, and in a way that was some kind of relief for you.
When I think of everything, that's almost the worst thing that I could say. It's not even the abuse. It's the fact that a part of me, and this will be hard for a lot of people to understand, because people quite rightly, like my children adore their mother, and she adores her mother, and that's how it should be. But I don't adore my mother. There's a part of me that is glad's not the right word, but there's a part of me that's, I've been a successful father and had some success in business, and I don't think any of that would have ever happened had she not died when I was 15.
Are you still angry with her?
No, angry's not the right word. You can't do anything about what's been's been. You've got to live in the present and the future, but you've got to understand what's happened in the past. So I feel sorry for her. I feel sorry that she was that physically and mentally unstable, that she felt that she could do that and that was okay, even if deep down she knew that it wasn't. No, I'm not angry. I'm sad more than anything. I am slowly getting better and healing and moving on, and we'll continue to do so. It just sort of shows it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what age you are. I'm 54, but it doesn't matter what age you are, you can still heal.
Hamish, who was sexually abused by his mother when he was in early adolescence. He was speaking with Ginger Gorman. And Lucetta Thomas is researching mothers who sexually abused their sons for her PhD at the University of Canberra. Her research is indicating that this kind of abuse may be far more common than you'd ever imagine possible.
One of the main areas of treatment and support that the guys that I interviewed or who completed the online survey that I did indicated was that they're not being believed. It's very difficult for them to even disclose what's happened to them because of, the cultural norms about, blokes being, strong and able to look after themselves, and, they must be some sort of a weak woos if a woman was actually able to perpetrate violence against them, even though what we're doing is talking about an adult woman and a male child, because most of the abuse actually occurs when the child is below the age of 10. And of course there is the power imbalance, so the child's in a very difficult position to protect himself. But the whole belief, this is what's actually happened, having it acknowledged, that's what they actually said was very, very difficult for them.
Can you summarise your research for me, Lucetta? You mentioned an online survey. First of all, how many men participated?
94 men filled out the online survey. And I also went on to interview in depth 24 of them. The ages ranged from 18 to well into their 60s. So it was quite a range and had obviously been happening for quite a varied period of time.
How did you find these men? Was it difficult to find them?
No, I put out an online survey which was actually picked up by a broadcaster. Within 24 hours I had over 80 people complete the survey.
What does that tell you?
It tells me there are a lot of males out there who've been sexually abused by their mother who have not disclosed and who feel that it's extremely important for them to have their story told and to have a voice about what's happened to them.
Is there any statistical knowledge of the frequency of sons being abused sexually by their mothers? I mean, do we know what the figures are?
Unfortunately, we don't, and I also had a look overseas to other English-speaking countries, and there is certainly a lot of information on the prevalence of females who perpetrate abuse on males, but not this particular cohort.
Well, Lucetta, tell me more about what you found out from these men who you interviewed. What did they tell you? Were there common threads?
Definitely common threads. My research specifically looked at what their help-seeking experiences had been and whether it was from professionals or friends or priest or whomever. And what they were saying to me was that they found it very, very helpful to be listened to and not to be judged whilst they were being listened to, for the therapist to have empathy for what actually happened to them, to confirm that they weren't responsible and that it has a very long-term impact.
Now, if you're a man impacted by sexual abuse and you need support, do please call Men's Line. The number for Men's Line is 1300 789978. And you're listening to Life Matters. I'm Amanda Smith.
I believe it started so young that I don't remember.
Ian is now 70 years old. He grew up in a poor rural household and was illegitimate. Ian's mother and her husband slept in separate bedrooms, and neither of them, according to Ian, wanted him. For Ian, and again this isn't his real name, the abuse from his mother started when he was very young. And another warning, his story is about his lived experience of child sexual abuse. This may be something you'll find too confronting. This is Ian speaking with Ginger Gorman about his memories of sexual abuse.
I was sleeping in her bed up until 8 years of age. I remember the touch of her body. It got to the stage where it just was confronting. It was yuck. All I remember is being repulsed.
By what though?
The touch and appearance, the shape.
I guess I'm just trying to understand what kinds of things were happening between you that were sexual in nature.
Getting me to suck her breasts, touch her vagina.
It's interesting though, because you said the word, it felt yuck. So even though you were tiny and you may not have known anything else, on some level you did understand that this wasn't right.
Yes, I can't understand that myself. I don't know if it's something that's innate or what, but yeah, that's the way it was.
And how long did the abuse go on as far as you're aware?
Well, it stopped when I was about 8 years of age. Her husband had a stroke, and the doctor came during the night and treated him, and I think it was the doctor that recognised that things were dysfunctional. I was sleeping in my mother's bed, and I would imagine that a doctor can put two and two together on that.
And then you were moved into your own bed, were you, after that situation?
Yeah. I was moved into a passage, not as in a bedroom, but into a passageway, and had my own bed.
That must have been a relief in a way, was it?
It was different. I was quite comfortable.
Can you tell me how you managed to grow up after such a devastating early childhood?
I was suicidal. I was sexually abused by other people. I obviously was a very needy child. I had no self-esteem. I didn't know what the word even meant. Very deprived, I would say. Very low education level.
Looking at your life, Ian, from the outside, in a way you went on to be very successful and you married and you've had very, very good jobs. So how did you possibly manage that?
I had total confusion in my head in my early life, and I used to have to do things multiple times to get them right. I changed from being bottom of the class as a child right through primary and high school, and then when I was shown some recognition as an adult, I actually all the courses that I'd done I became top of.
And from what you've said to me, that must have almost been the first time in your life that you had that recognition, given the way that your mother brought you up.
It was. And I can still remember those days when, the first bit of recognition came my way.
How did the abuse affect your ability to be, say, a husband or a father, given that you perhaps didn't have that role modelling in your own early life?
I feel sorry for my wife and my children because I was never played the role as a husband should, and I never had the skills of what a father should. They suffered as a result of what I had as a child too.
Did you love your wife?
I didn't know what love meant. I carried the hatred on that I had to my mother, to my wife, in a masked sense. So I've lived a sham. I've created a sham. And I'm not proud of that. I've had affairs. I drank a lot. Lived life dangerously. I've had many, many accidents. Could have been killed a number of times. And I lived most of my life disassociated.
And what about your two sons?
I couldn't pass on skills that they needed. I couldn't enjoy any sport with them. I can still remember my eldest son swimming, and he was in a race, and he was way up in front. I couldn't acknowledge him, I couldn't clap, I couldn't do anything. I was just walking up and down the pool, just totally locked up. In actual fact, it would have been better if I wasn't there.
And you felt somehow distant from him and his achievements because of what you had been through yourself as a child?
Yes, yeah.
So from your mid-20s, when you first started seeing a psychologist, until now, what has that journey towards becoming mentally healthy looked like for you?
It took a very long journey, too long, but I did start that journey. I'm totally different now. I'm reasonably comfortable now to where I am in a headspace. Probably like to be in a better one, but it was only in the last 10 years that I've made real progress, and that was with a special form of psychology, I suppose, and it was emptying out of issues, and it was about actually understanding the perpetrators. I have forgiveness. I have understanding of, although I don't condone what she done, I have understanding as to where it come from, and I've learnt that everyone is a product of their whole life experiences, and her life experiences must have been pretty poor to take her to that level.
And it's taken Ian, who's now 70, nearly 50 years to come to terms with having been sexually abused as a young child by his mother. You're listening to a special report here in Life Matters about mothers who sexually abuse their sons. Let's return to Lucetta Thomas, who's researching this subject for her doctorate at the University of Canberra, and the advice she offers to other men who've had this experience and never reached out for help.
I'm actually going to give them the advice of the men that I spoke to, and that is find yourself a therapist, a practitioner who you are comfortable with, who you feel is listening to you, is not judging you, is empathetic towards what actually happened to you. And if you don't find that person the first time, go and find somebody else and keep looking for somebody until you find the therapist who is right for you.
And Lucetta Thomas is researching men who were, as children, sexually abused by their mothers, including Hamish and Ian, who we heard from, speaking with Ginger Gorman for Life Matters. And if you're a man who's experienced sexual abuse, you can call Men's Line 1300 789978. There's also Lifeline available 24 hours for anyone who needs it, 13 11 14. Also, there's a link to other support services on the Life Matters website.